We basically bought something that was making, $3,000 a month, something like that. And we paid $45,000 for it or something like that. But with it came a ton of acreage, so we had some pieces of acreage in the Permian that turned into, a nice, 10X just on that, 1031 that into a place in Park City. Then we rolled that into the Broken Bow investments. And that's the foundation of everything we've done out here. And Broken Bow specifically, early on, we weren't anticipating to sell, the first couple cabins, but it was kind of during the COVID era and prices were going astronomical. And, what did we 3 or 4x our equity on those first two places in a year. The cash flow jumped from 3,000 a month to 15 to 20 once you had all that margin. And then we just cash flowed it for a number of years. It's a pretty astronomical number.
Just walk through the steps of switching everything over to self-management.
Q4 24 versus Q4 23 when we had management versus when we didn't. We improved our profitability by like 30% in that quarter and revenues up like 25%. I don't think the STR space, to be successful in it, is something that is just a passive set it and forget it kind of thing. It's really not a passive investment. You need to either have someone or you yourself being active. I'm going to plop this on Airbnb and make a bunch of money, because that's not how you're going to be successful.
Jeff, welcome back on the podcast.
It's been a while, Max. Been a while.
It has been a while. Not a while since we've talked, because we talk most days, but a while since we've recorded one of these. The last one we did was in Broken Bow, and we had like a bottle of bourbon. Probably not the best one to go listen to. I think this one will be better because it's been an update. How many years ago do you think that was?
That's probably been 4 years ago at least, which is kind of crazy to think about. Obviously a lot's changed, and side note, everyone's always asking about like, oh, did you hear Max's latest pod? I'm like, no, I talk to him every day.
Yeah, you're like,
what's going on?
You're like my wife. She's like, I don't need to listen to your podcast. She's like, I hear you talk all the time. She's like, I'm good.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. So for people that don't know, I'm not going to make you give the full background, but I'll give some of our background. But Jeff and I are partners in the real estate stuff that we do, called Ainsley Management. We've got a real estate investment fund, as well as our development. Everything's located down in Broken Bow, Oklahoma, and we'll talk about why that is here later on the podcast. Jeff and I, we've known each other now for like 10 years.
Yeah, it's probably been about 10 or 11 years. I've started working together on the, consulting side really ended up being kind of both ways. But when you were starting in Cova, marketing and consulting, I guess we were probably one of those first clients, right?
I think you were like the third client. Yeah.
Yeah. So we started there, and obviously you and Mark did an awesome job for us. And then I think when we stepped out, not knowing what we were going to do, thinking energy was the move. We worked together on a project there that didn't come to fruition, but we did some consulting on the upstream side. So kind of there. And then obviously all the other, our two other partners are from the energy space as well.
So basically, the interesting thing about our relationship in the story of working together, I feel, is that you hear this mantra of like play long-term games with long-term relationships, and it just makes things, there's a trust that gets built. It makes doing business basically kind of frictionless, right? Not totally frictionless. We don't see eye to eye on everything, but in terms of like the trust element and the knowing the other person element. And so just it's been so huge because, once you've worked with somebody for so long, it's so easy to approach them with business ideas or thoughts, or if you're going to go take a risk and do a new venture, you kind of know how the other person thinks, you know them ethically and morally. And so just, it feels like it's kind of a cheat code when you can have a good relationship for a long time and do lots of things together. I feel like it just makes it way easier.
Yeah, I would just add to that, you kind of hit on the ethics, and like just the trust factor really is always huge for me in any partnership. And, it goes, but then also becoming friends. It obviously start off in a business relationship, but we've had a chance to, be around each other's families. We know each other, so it just kind of creates that trust, and, everything's easy when it's going well. It's just when things turn a little bit or there's some challenges or obstacles, that's when that really kind of shows its face. And the value of that is huge, just to have that trust to kind of work through things. So, and we've had to do that for sure. So,
well, that's a great other piece to this, which is you don't really know somebody in business until things go wrong. And I remember tweeting that one time, and it wasn't even about stuff with us, but just in general, I've learned that through different like business ventures or partnerships or even like customer relationships. It's like it's really easy when everything's going right. It's whenever there's challenges is where I feel like you really get to know who you're working with, whether that's a partner or whether that's a client or whoever. And so if you can go through those times and then come out of them and get to the good times again, it just makes things a lot stronger. And I think one thing that's interesting about our working relationship is that there's a yin and a yang, and we don't always see eye to eye. And similar to myself and Mark Edge, my partner on the energy stuff, we don't always see eye to eye, but I actually think that's kind of a good thing.
I do too. And I've also had to have a few calls with Mark to learn how to handle Max, get some advice there at times. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we do, and I think our focus is different spaces too. I mean, you've always been kind of, I've admired the way, like when I come up with an idea or something that's going on, you have a great ability to kind of quickly reduce something and look at stuff from a macro level, whereas I'm kind of more in the weeds on the execution operations stuff. Not that we're not capable of either side of it, but just having that different perspective, I think helps us quite a bit. So, that's why I'm on the phone constantly, just try to work through things. And usually, it gets easier and easier too. As time goes on, you kind of, like you said, how people think. But if everyone's a yes man and agrees with everything, then you're not doing it right, because you need that different perspective. And that's the value in partnerships, that you should have some dissenting opinions, and it's a healthy thing.
For sure. And I think we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on lately with the real estate stuff. I think you bring a lot of perspective to to the whole venture. People ask me a lot of questions around different nuts and bolts things, like how the sausage is made, how people reach out to me about property management stuff or about building questions. And a lot of times I'm kind of like, you should probably talk to Jeff, because I'm not as in the weeds on these things as you are. And someone recently even commented on Twitter X and was like, "Hey, I'd love to hear more about how you guys have done the switch to self management, and had the direct booking website and all these things." And I'm like, it kind of the light bulb went on. I was like, I should have Jeff on the podcast to talk about this stuff. But before we launch into the update on what's going on and tell some more of the story of the real estate company, would love to. There's like this incredible parlay that you've done to get to this point, and you don't have to necessarily talk numbers on it, but just like your guys' initial like oil and gas investment, and then that into, it's just incredible that like small investment that you made is parlayed into this full blown company now.
Yeah, that thing has been the gift that it's still the gift that keeps on giving. So I mean, basically what it was we bought Wes, who's another one of our partners, and I bought. This gas prices were depressed, and there's an insurance company that was just wanted to offload a bunch of non-op interests, and so we basically bought something that was making, $3,000 a month, something like that, and we paid $45,000 for it or something like that. But with it came a ton of acreage, and really, we were buying that when it was, $1.50 gas, and so. Fast forward, so we had some pieces of acreage in the Permian that turned into, a nice 10x just on that. Then we rolled that into a place at 1031 that into a place in Park City, which also we rolled that into the Broken Bow investments, and that's the foundation of everything we've done out here. Our original capital contribution was from just that one piece of this deal. And then the deal also has, we also had, the cash flow jumped from 3,000 a month to 15 to 20 once you had all that margin. So it really juiced it up. And then we just cash flowed it for a number of years. Then we carved out all of the acreage around it, which is like 1,300 acres, at, huge overrides, because in Oklahoma you get forced pooled, and if you don't have the capital to go participate, a lot of times you're going to get nothing for the acreage. And so we did that early on. Then we sold basically the production uh, plus the acreage that was heavily burdened now, like 70% of our eyes. We basically just sold it for cash flow, but we sold it at a $7 or $8 gas environment. So, sold that for a heavy multiple on top of it. And then now we're getting wells proposed on the acreage. So there may be another, $200,000 just little grab here and there. So, I mean, when you run the numbers on that, and when it rolled into with Ainsley and what we've been able to do that, thankfully, it's a pretty astronomical number, but that's over a 10-year period, that happened, or probably 7 or 8 years or something like that. So I'd love to find some more deals like that, but it's a unicorn, but also it came with a lot of work and effort. So it didn't just happen necessarily. There's a lot of stuff, but really the genesis of all this stuff came from like a $22,000 investment, 7 or 8 years ago. And now it's, quite a bit more than that, obviously.
It's crazy. It's like, when you think about how these things play out over time and how one good decision, can roll into another. The other thing that I think is an interesting lesson from this and something that we've learned and oftentimes struggled with decision making and when to do things is kinda like the velocity of money. You've got a good long-term investment, and then you say, "Yeah, but if I could pull 3 years or 5 years or 7 years forward to today, then I can redeploy that." I think that Right. And I think there's a lot of people that get in trouble with 1031s because they just feel like they have to do something. So it's not always like a good thing to try to have to roll immediately into something. But if you're smart about it and you do things like 1031 or like take advantage of qualified opportunity zones, which we have in Broken Bow, you can really take an initial investment and through the velocity of money, through like timely exits and monetizations, continue to snowball things much quicker than just buying something and holding it kind of forever. And there's different philosophies to each, but I feel like we've struck a good balance between knowing kind of when to get in and when to get out on certain investments.
Yeah, no, I think we have a lot of conversations around that, have over the years. And I think we've kind of, like you said, I mean, it's just, I think we, in Broken Bow specifically, I mean, early on, we weren't anticipating to sell, the first couple cabins, but, it was kind of during the COVID era and prices were going astronomical. And, what did we 3 or 4 extra equity on those first 2 places in a year? It's like you got to take that money. And then that snowballed into, okay, well, let's go raise a fund. So that we raise a fund, and then we've got 10 builds going on, and then we've sold off a couple of those for a nice gain, and then really kind of working on now and just kind of holding off what we have. Just kind of seeing right now, while our stuff's doing well, and not everyone would tell you that up there, but we just got our numbers and everything's looking positive and it's going in the right direction. But we also recognize that there's saturation on listings, and the best way to be able to ultimately exit that is to perform. And so we're just in no rush. Our debt is very manageable. We're locked in at 4% interest rates on everything for the most part. We built so our cost basis is way lower versus buying retail. That was a smart decision that we consciously made. And so, like right now, it's probably not the best time to exit, and we'll see that through, and it's going to turn. We know it will. But even saying that, we did just sell a cabin, in our broader portfolio, and I think that was the fourth time that I know of that we've set the high comp mark in the entire market out there. I think we've done it. We did it, the first cabin we have, we did it, and then we parlayed that one off the other one, which also did it, and then we did an off-market deal probably 18 months ago after one of our first builds, and that was the highest number I was ever aware of out there, and then we just exceeded that again. So not to say I'm not believing we can do that every time, but I mean it just speaks to what you're saying about picking your spots, and when to sell. There's always the right. You don't want to just hold it thinking it's going to be worth. Oh, it might be worth 300,000 or 400,000 more in 3 years. Well, it may not, and so take it. And then what can you do with that profit? And we have places to go with it too. So that's the positive. We have other builds we can do, other projects. So that's the other thing. It's just the opportunity cost.
It is the opportunity cost, and it's figuring out when to make those decisions. And I think that the setting the high water mark in these sale comps is part luck, but it's also part preparation and doing the right things. It's like picking out the right lots, making sure it has the right amenities, doing the design of the cabins and building them in a way that is attractive from an aesthetic viewpoint as well as a functionality, in terms of somebody that's an investor versus somebody that's wanting to use it for personal use. You kind of have to strike a balance. I know there's a lot of crazy amenities out there with like slides and all these things, but like, would somebody want to buy that as a personal use home? And we've had a number of these exits that are to high net worth individuals that just want to use it. They don't necessarily want to rent it, or if they do rent it, it's like a limited piece of what they're trying to do. And so I think that there was definitely luck involved in some of those, but there was also a lot of tons of thought, preparation, execution. What would you say was like the hardest part of doing all the builds at once and the fun? Because we went from building like one cabin and we're like, this is easy, we can build this, got done in like 9 months, and then going and trying to build a bunch all at once.
Yeah, well, I think it was, some things that were circumstantial, which is probably the biggest issue. We did have some plans drawn up, and we were pretty intentional about some of them, and some of them we just kind of had off the shelf plans that we kind of liked. Um, we talked to a builder up there that you know was kind of, I still like them personally, on great terms, with them personally, but just circumstantially, he was someone that got out of the game and then back in the game. So he'd been up there for a while, and his desire was to work with more investor types, which sounded great to me, because it's like, okay, he's got 2 or 3 clients that are building multiple properties, and it's something he can manage. Well, outside of our control, there wasn't anything contractually about limiting him to that, obviously. And so we look up, and he's got 50 builds going on at one time. And so, our challenge was, our time frame of 9 to 12 months, which is still probably a little high, honestly, for these. All of a sudden it moves to 18, 20 months. And that kind of created a working capital issue there for a while, and just trying to crack the whip was tough. Then honestly, quality control was a big thing, and still is. We're still have had to go in and kind of fix a lot of the things that, either holding their feet to the fire and then fixing it, or just biting it and fixing it ourselves on some things. And so that was a big lesson learned in that first round of building, was that just because a GC has built a bunch of cabins up there doesn't mean that they're going to have they're not going to know exactly how a lighting plan should be. And so you need to be up there checking that, walking through the properties. It's not that we didn't, but it was just kind of a little naivety, if that's a word, that, assuming that they're going to do the job that you're paying them for, to how you would expect them to do it. And, in some cases it was just not to par. And then we'd run up against it where it's like, okay, we're up there checking it, but you really only kind of see it really come together towards the end. And that's like, oh crap, well, now you got to stop and say, well, you got to fix these things. And it's already done. It's a lot more difficult to do, to go back and fix it. And so definitely a lot of that. We've kind of switched horses on builders as a result of that. I would say another thing that we've done going forward is being a lot more, intentional about our plans, and we're building them, not just looking at amenities, but like building them specific to the lots. I go and do on-site visits with drafters, designer, builder now. And I think that leads to the most successful project. I mean, for a while there, that may sound like, duh, you should do that, but it's not exactly how it worked up in Broken Bow. It was very difficult to find anything from a land standpoint. A lot of times a builder already had a plan ready that they're going to build. You really didn't even have much control, because they were either going to sell to you or sell to somebody else. So it's just kind of switched the dynamic where, not only should you be, but you kind of have the ability to be a little more leverage with the builders and the subs to kind of get things that you need done, quality, timing, cost, kind of all those things. So we really kind of dialed that in a lot, in our recent builds. And, really excited to see that. The most recent one we did, we had a great outcome. We guys finished 2. We sold 1, and the other one, our fund, is looking like it's going to be great. This early rental numbers are going to look really good. And, I think the result, you're seeing that in the results, is my point, because those are probably the 2 cabins that we spent the most time on. And you're kind of seeing that with your cabin, Max. Like, even going out there, when I looked at it with your designer, and like last minute, I was like, okay, no, we didn't make like these changes, and kind of quickly brought that to your attention, and I think you have a much better product, like widening the kitchen, more, you just learn this stuff, you see it. And not everything is you can see something on a plan, but then you also live it, like in our business of renting it in short-term rentals. You get feedback from guests, and you kind of understand what they look for, and then you start incorporating those things in your builds to make sure that it's not an issue or something you have to address later on. So I think it's just learnings, across the board. But initially, the biggest problem was just like quality control and timing, and cracking the whip, just because of just how crazy the thing just boomed, bills across the board in the whole market.
And it wasn't all bad with the initial builder. Some of the stuff was, it was like, so for example, the recent one, Orion's Outlook, that we did, it was with the same builder. It's a incredible cabin. I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's
the best
probably
build
one
they
of,
did. Yeah,
yes, probably one of my favorites. Part of that was how we managed it. Part of that was growing pains, working with them. We can knock them on some of the issues that we had, but ultimately Swimming with the Stars, we sold that cabin. It was the highest comp in the entire
right.
market that builder did. So there was good and bad, like parts of it worked out well. Some of it was like self-inflicted wounds. Like we went cheaper on, for example, putting in pools with these modular pools, but then that caused problems with the installs that led to time delays. They still look cool and they were cheaper, but it caused time delays. Whereas had we went with a gunite pool, it might have been more expensive, but we probably could have been online earlier.
Yeah,
So
6 months earlier of rental income. Yeah, exactly. So
So it was a lot of learning there where, it wasn't all bad, but it definitely was lessons learned. And on the margin, it's been positive. The cabins that were done with that builder performed really well. Like our two big ones that we have left that they did have been incredible properties. I mean, they're exceeding pro forma. I think Orion's Outlook, the newest big one, is going to exceed pro forma. Our two bedrooms are right on pro forma. Hopefully they'll exceed it this year because we've made some tweaks to management and marketing that we'll talk about. And in our one bedroom, he didn't build that one. That was
no, he didn't. That was another builder. Yeah. Well, he built. Well, he did build. We did have another one bedroom that was kind of a similar plan that we sold. Just because we kind of saw that one bedroom, rental from the rental side being super saturated and just not performing across the board. So made a decision to exit. We did exit one, still have one, but I also see since we've taken over self management, I was looking at the numbers the other day, and I think we're up, Q4 24 versus Q4 23 when we had management versus when we didn't. We've improved our profitability by like 30% in that quarter, year over year, and revenues up like 25%. So I think that there's signs that it can get maybe not back up to where we underwrote it, but a lot of improvement to where we can get it to be cash flow positive, where it's kind of like break even, a little bit, give or take.
yeah, and it's the example of like shifting market dynamics where you see like, one bedrooms used to be super high occupancy, then it got saturated. And so there's a lot of just like on the fly kind of having to make adjustments because it's like you underwrite to certain assumptions based on past history, and then the market starts to change and evolve and you have to kind of roll with the punches. And so I think we've done a good job of that. And I think in the back half of this conversation, I want to talk more about the development and about the future. But, specifically addressing this question that I got on Twitter the other day, just walk through the steps of switching everything over to self management. And I think that early on it was, hey, we're building all this stuff. We've got a good property manager. Let's utilize that while we're focused on these builds for the stuff that we had online. And then now is like, the portfolio matures, there's less builds. You really start to dial in on the profit and loss on the P&L, looking at maximizing, not just top line, but also bottom line and all the different expenses that are involved. And that was like a 6-month process, at least, of you researching, hiring consultants, figuring out, what do we need to do, getting software put in place. Even prior to that 6 months, we were investing heavily in social media and marketing. We now have the largest social media platform in the entire market, I believe, the largest organic one, at least. There might be some bot ones, but I think ours is the biggest real deal social
Yeah,
media channel. But talk about just the lead up to and then the
sure.
lessons learned now in the
Yeah, I mean,
process.
I think, as you pointed out, I mean, I guess I'll talk about two things, kind of like, what led up to that decision point, and then, the actual process of transitioning into it. As Max kind of mentioned, we got to a point of scale where we had, 8 or 9 properties that are pretty high, half of those are pretty high performers from a dollar standpoint. We just kind of looked at, okay, well, what are we giving up here? And you start running the math, just napkin math, and it's pretty significant. But then on top of that, some things that were kind of concerning were, the fact that we were subsidizing and spending, 40, 50 grand a year in social media and really building up our brand, but then everything funnels through the management company. And so, we didn't really have control on metrics to understand like conversion of that. And then we didn't really have, we just couldn't really see what it was doing, and we knew it was working. But we just really felt like the lack of control was kind of the biggest thing. Is it related to a really big budget item for us? And then two, we felt like some of that should be absorbed in the management costs, and it really wasn't. We didn't feel like, other than the occasional like Facebook ad, where our portfolio was probably 20% of the properties they had, but it probably made up 40% of the revenue, and so when we're getting 1 out of 10 Facebook ads, and what is that even really doing? We don't even understand it. We can't get numbers on where are our direct booking, what percentage of direct bookings versus, third party channels, VRBO, Airbnb, just not understanding a lot of that data. And then, we started digging into it, asking questions, and there's kind of a couple of other concerns. And what I will say is like people that we had, they're great. I don't think there's anything ill intention. It's just kind of how it evolved for us. But, like we realized that, spending all this money with the goal of getting more direct bookings, but not understanding how many direct bookings we're getting, and then also realizing that the pricing wasn't any different. So when you go direct booking, you should be capturing like 10% more. That wasn't the case. So top line, and it was really just that essentially was kind of the decision. When you look at the expense side of things, there are some things that were concerning as far as just like a list of maintenance items that we would bring up that weren't getting addressed and not really having control over that. We were spending a ton of money on propane, but not really negotiating anything with the propane companies when we're spending 30, 40 grand a year on propane to heat pools. There's just a lot of things there that, and I would also say, a lot of management companies, and I'm not saying this one is or isn't, I don't really even know, but, a lot of them they'll pad a bunch of these repairs where it's like, okay, their cost is, for a service call is $100, but they're charging the owners 200, so there was, I know a lot of that was going on, and it probably does across the board. Someone gave me a quote that said like, your stated rental commission for a property manager is about half the revenue. And I was like, that just blew me away. I was like, well, we just got to dial that in. And so it started with just really taking a look because of the scale for those reasons. We got into it. It was a lot of, you're on some of these calls, Max, or reaching out to other people that have done it. We didn't want to go into it lightly. We wanted to be confident that we could improve on it or feel like, we were certainly, at least that we wouldn't be worse off, right? Uh, and so I didn't want to just say, okay, sure, we can just do it and we'll figure it out. It was a lot of getting our ducks in a row and having the confidence that we could do it. So there's a lot of talking to people that have done it, learning their processes, learning the different software setups and the tech stack. So it's a lot of signing that up, onboarding. Then we're hiring, overseas VAs. We hired an ops guy that's up there that's kind of dedicated to our stuff, and all that was in place. And basically, had our new listings set up. We had a lot of the processes in place, all the software, the cleaning crews, ops, all that stuff, and all of that was in place before we even gave notice to the management company that we're going to take this over. And then there was a lot of transitioning. That we were able to transition a lot of our reservations from them, so we didn't have to see a big P&L interruption from it. That was another thing, was like strategically picking the timing of when we do this. We thought about that, because that could be an issue for people. If got to check their contracts and see what it says. But a lot of times a property manager is going to take your bookings and try to push them to one of their properties, and so that can lead to a P&L interruption for sure. And so, we knew that could be the case, but just because we had a good relationship with them, and we were able to kind of negotiate that to keep a lot of our bookings, which is great. Minimal interruption there. And, the other question was timing. Originally we set out to do this. Probably we would have targeted like January, February, like right now to do it. But the challenge with that was we had two big new properties are about to be done, and the decision was just made like, hey, let's just do it. Like, we just got to rip the Band-Aid off here and get it done, because I didn't want to set it up with a third party just to rip it from 2 or 3 months later. It just seemed kind of silly to me. So we did it, and it worked out well. I think we've got a pretty good tech stack, a good team. Yes, early returns, we're looking at the first 3 months or so, and I think we have probably 80, 85 reviews across a couple platforms. And I think everyone but one is all 5 stars. We've got super status, there's the whatever it's called for VRBO too. So we're getting probably 35 to 40% direct bookings just through our social media marketing. We still have some work to do there. Um, I think that's a big advantage for us. The fact that we own our properties as well as manage is we're able to see, to pay for that additional social media budget, marketing, and search engine optimization. I don't think a lot of these groups out here in this market do. They probably do some of it, I'm sure, but not to the level that we have because we own 100% of it. I mean, through the different entities, and so I think that's an advantage that as we look. I mean, we're kind of talking about potentially taking on, being selective about within the development or some other areas of bringing on some third party. Now we have the platform built and we've kind of seen the results that, I'm confident that I can go tell someone that I think we can do really well for them and really believe it and stand behind it because I do now. But as before, it's like let's make sure we have our own house in order before we go do that. But I think it's a big selling point right there. It's not just the I think the social media is huge. I think we drive a lot of traffic and a lot of bookings through it. But the other side of that, I think, is the transparency and just saying like, I mean, you've preached that to me, Max, over the years with your clients, on the gas marketing side. That was a huge benefit. It's a huge. That's what kind of won, a big piece of what won us over is, just alignment and transparency. So, whatever bill there is to fix a sink, that's the bill you get. It's not a markup, and I think that's going to lead to a lot of profitability increase for other people. And it's something you should be paying attention to if you're looking to self manage or talking to another property manager. I think that's a huge piece. Everyone just focuses on, oh, here's the rental numbers, here's the rental numbers. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, there's another part of that. There's a bottom part of that, a profit and loss statement that you need to be paying attention to as well. Um, and it's not just through the property managers with the maintenance and repairs and stuff. It's also across the board. Like we constantly shop our insurance. Making sure we're dialed in there. We had been with a group for a while, and our premiums like they try to. It was like doubling it. It was going from like $6,000 a year to like 12 or 14. We're like, absolutely not. So we shop it around, and we've shopped it a couple times, and now we've gotten that. Whereas it was $6,000 before, now that same cabin's probably gonna be 4 or 5. So we're actually better off than we were originally. So I just think it's just active management. I don't think the STR space to be successful in it is something that is just a passive set it and forget it kind of thing. It's really not a passive investment. I mean, you need to be either have someone or you yourself being active in, guest coordination and maintenance and, making sure your insurance is in line and just everything across the board. And probably go on for a while on that there's a lot that goes into it, and I would just encourage anyone that's considering it. I don't think it's too daunting to do, but just don't go into it thinking that this is I'm going to plop this on Airbnb and make a bunch of money, because that's not how you're going to be successful.
Yeah, there's a ton. We could go on this topic of self-management and all the lessons learned for a while. I think that it was the amount of preparation just before we even launched. You got the direct bookings website. So you have to build a website, make it look good. There's copywriters that have to write it for you. There are the engine that runs it. So the booking engine, we had a bunch of fiasco with that, where we set up a certain engine for our old property manager to link it to theirs. Well, they sold the company, and then all of a sudden that engine was obsolete. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we accelerated the switch. It was like, this is ridiculous. We're not going to do another implementation with a new engine. Like, we'll just put in our own tech stack and do it ourselves.
Reminder there, yeah, there was a while. There was like a 3-week period where we couldn't even get any bookings on our site. So yeah, that was a big driver as well. I forgot about that one.
And it's just all the little things that go into it, and there's just so much tweaking and refining. We got a consultant that came in who's just focused on listings and pricing, and he looks at everything and he brings out all these great points. He's like, all your cabins are pet friendly. I can't even find the words pet friendly till I scroll down to the very bottom of the page. He's like, that should be at the top. Some people, that's the main thing they're looking for. Or, you got pictures on here that are incredible and they're buried way back in stuff that seems like common sense when someone says it, but you're kind of trusting a property manager who's supposedly an expert. And to your point, they did a great job at a lot of things. So I don't want to like tear down who we were using. I think in a lot of instances, it would have been fine to keep using them if we weren't, running a real business. If this was like a passive, side thing, and it was, hey, look, if it makes some money, that's great. That's how it is for a lot of people. They have this investment, they want it to, obviously make money and do well, but they use it personally, and that's not what this is. It's a real business. We're trying to maximize it, and for you, it's your full time focus. And so I think that it's been a lot of lessons learned, but ultimately the right moves were made to do the self management, and it'll pay dividends in the long term. Switching to the back half of the conversation, I want to talk about the development, Mountain Fork Resort. I'd say a lot of what we've done has been obviously taking some bigger swings to try to hit some doubles and triples, but this one was a pretty big cut. Trying to aim for the fences on it, and something that maybe went in a little bit more naive to how much work it would be. And but again, has been a really successful outcome, and we've learned a ton. But you were instrumental in getting the deal set up and then helping manage it. So just talk to the development, and we'll launch into some of the challenges faced and lessons learned there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this kind of was born from, the idea of, hey, this is back, shifting back 3 years ago, different time environment where it was difficult to find land if you could get it in these other developments, just on a single lot basis, not even on a development standpoint. And, the costs were high. You'd be kind of selecting stuff. We did have the benefit of getting in there through our builder relationships and kind of getting some of the better choice lots, but, ahead of time, and, that we benefited from that. But it was just really difficult to do. And then the cost basis of it, we're looking at building versus buying retail. And then like the next step was, okay, well, let's maybe look at some raw land and see. I think the original idea was, we'll be able to sell this out quickly, and we'll be able to hold back some of the premium stuff for ourselves and build on, and so the other thought was, so that was kind of the original idea, and what got us at least thinking about it and looking around. Then the next step was like literally just looking at, public record maps and trying to figure out like where would be a good spot. And there's a couple, bigger, a lot of that land up there is either owned by it's U.S. National Forestry, State Park, Indian land, or the other option from the private side is Weyerhaeuser, that owns this big timber company that owns a ton of stuff. And so that's where a lot of the developments have sold or bought their land from, is Weyerhaeuser. So it's like, well, if someone else can do it, we can do it. And let's look for an area that that we might like, that's differentiated a little bit. And the big thing that we kept coming back to was, we noticed that these developments had a premium for like just creeks or these little ponds that people would dig in these developments. We're like, okay, there's clearly a premium for water here. I mean, to the tune of like 30 or 40% on a lot that we were seeing just within one development, like an interior lot for something on a creek, and it's just seasonal creek, and it's probably like 10 feet wide or something like that. So cool, not knocking that, but the premium for it was kind of astronomical in my mind. And so you can't get on the lake out here because it's Corps Engineers, but there was an opportunity to look at some areas along the river. And we're like, okay, well, this would be cool because it's got, a legitimate, 300-400 foot wide usable, body of water that's flowing. It's pretty, it's rock bottom. It's coming out of the state park. We're like, man, that'd be great to find that, something like that. So we just ended up cold calling, finding the property. It took probably what, a year to close that. It was really like I went out there to try to find it. I'm blocked by a gate. I run into it. I mean, just circumstantially just run into a guy that's out there on a hunting lease who's got a side by side. He's like, well, I'll show you around. I was like, okay. So I hop the fence and get around. He's like, show me all the property, taking me in the river. Like it was just kind of, like it's just happened. It seemed like it was meant to be a little bit, just because I was like, there was no way at that point I was going to get out there and walk, 150 acres or, for that point where it was blocked off is a lot further than that. I mean, I probably just would have forgot about it and moved on, but that just kind of happened. Like I happened to be there, and it's like, then I saw it and I was like, this is it, So then we, ended up negotiating that over a year-long period, probably. And yeah, then we closed it. We had a partner in it that kind of backed out, and we're like, we just ended up taking the whole thing initially. And then we ended up selling down a little bit for working capital with just friends and family. So we still own our group owns about 88% of it or something like that. And then the execution piece came, and that's where Max spoke about just kind of underestimating, because you see, you saw what other people do up there, and it's just dirt roads where they cut in utilities and that's it, right? But we didn't really want that. That wasn't really our vision for this. We wanted something that was a little bit more upscale. It was unique. It had amenities, and so we hired a consultant out of Park City. She kind of helped us program things. We'd already kind of had it platted off, but we made some adjustments to what we were doing, and we made a carved out a spot for like basically probably the best piece of land in there. We cut out it's right 3 or 4 acres right on the river bend, and we made that like a community park for people. And on the north side, we have access with like a fishing dock, and we've got a clubhouse. We made a big gated entrance, so there's like a security element to it, and just like it's just a great feeling like driving in through that big nice gate. These are just nice amenities. We're going to have a clubhouse with a pool, a gym, yoga room. We're going to have pickleball courts, barbecue areas. We've got a horseshoe pit down by the river, a rocked beach. So there's a huge fishing dock and hangout dock on the north side, a kayak launch there. I mean, so there's just a lot of things that we wanted to offer to people, but it wasn't. That was an even bigger bet. Because this area was not in the Hochtown area. It's probably 20 miles away. I don't know if it's 20 miles, but it's 20, 25 minutes, probably about 20 miles, maybe not as a crow flies, but anyways, it was geographically a little bit of a bet. And it was an even bigger bet that we said, okay, our playbook is not going to be to buy the land and subdivide it and put in roads and sell it. We're going to go take a step further, and we're going to add another, $2.5–3 million of amenities in here. So we paid a good price for it, and then we took a big bet on doubling down on adding those amenities. And quickly, I think we saw. I mean, we had a number of pre-sales of just people, kind of friends and family, and just some random people that would get out there. And it did well. I mean, we sold everything for probably more than we underwrote price per acre, because I think people saw it. They could see the value of being on the water and just the beauty of it, and actually kind of became a positive, because in the meantime, Hochatown was getting like super congested, and still is. They're working through that, so I'm not going to dog it completely, because I think it will improve on widening the highways. But people get beat down with it if they're coming up there a lot, and there are a lot of repeat renters up there that or builders, that's the other thing. The builders that would come see our property like, wow, this is great. Not only because it's remote and it's by the river, but also because I can avoid all the congestion up here. Another thing that's been talked about is the incorporation of Hochtown, which I hope in the long term, because we do have some exposure there, that it works out. But there's frustrations with cabin owners that all of a sudden their taxes are their sales and use, or their occupancy taxes are up there another 4 or 5%. And I think there's plans, and I think they will get it done and better, is my hope, but not a lot of benefits. So I think that's another thing that's kind of drawing people to us, is that it's not in the super congested area. It's kind of taking them back to what Beaver's Bend and Broken Bow was and what they fell in love with. And there's still a lot of benefits up there. I'm not going to dog it, but it's just different. It's just a different feeling down there. I mean, so we bought that. It probably took a year. Some of the challenges were just like getting in the roads. We ran into like a ridiculously, heavy rain season, like right after we started cutting roads, which just delayed us about 6 months. You also had to, a lot of the electrical equipment was on back order, so we had to order that, and it took 9 months or something like that to get in. So those were a couple of challenges there. Well, shoot, not to mention the biggest challenge. I don't know if we touched on this, but I guess it was probably 2 or 3 weeks after we closed the whole deal that there was like an F4 tornado that ripped through there at 120-mile-an-hour winds and missed our property, because that's a big selling point of these developments, is just the trees and the beauty of those. And I mean, shoot, it probably missed us by, Max had his drone up. He ran out there the next day or two. Couldn't even drive back there, but the drone showed it going, 300 feet maybe from our property, something like that. I mean, now it's all fine. It's clear. It looks okay. But I mean, that was before we sold anything, and we're putting personal guarantees on the line. It's not that you wouldn't have been able to sell it or come back, but it wouldn't have been as good of a project. And there was many a whiskey that night watching the radar, but But yeah, so I'd say those are kind of just the big challenges. Then we also, we debated a lot about, absorption rate and timing and maximizing value versus what you talked about earlier, Max. I mean, you and I went back and forth on this for probably 3 or 4 months. And what I'm getting to is we ultimately decided to do a kind of like a marketed event sale out there in the summer. And but it's very expensive to do it. Your commissions are very heavy on the sale. You're spending, it's another, triple down bet is what it is, because you're spending $500,000-600,000 on marketing and event costs, and you're spending another $300,000-400,000 on beautifying the property. I mean, we went through there and mulched every single lot. We cleaned up everything out there. We rushed to get all the amenities in before we probably had to, where we could, and so that was probably another $1 million bet on it, and it worked out. I mean, we had in one day we got $6 million of sales under contract. So we were kind of freaking out a little bit because the goal was to get 150, 200 appointments out there, and there was 50, and so that was kind of concerning. This was during a slower market. This was last year, and kind of pre-election, a lot of uncertainty going on, and but we did know from our own work and effort of selling lots, because we did have a lot of success and a lot of like a high conversion rate, in our group of getting lots sold. And when we got people out there, even if they didn't buy a lot, it was genuine that people really did like what we were doing. And so what it led to was we ended up getting like a 60% conversion on people that came out there that bought lots, which is kind of unheard of for these. That's based on the brokerage group that did it for us. They're like, okay, yeah, normal's like 25 to 30, and we doubled that. And so we didn't get as many people out there, which may have been circumstantial. There was also another event that went on like the weekend before, which we didn't know about, which probably kind of took some steam out of our deal. But that was a big success story. And then subsequent to that, we ended up selling all of phase two, just completely undeveloped, and did really well on that one as well. So I think where it sits now is we probably have about, I want to say about 75% of the acreage inventory, what we originally bought. We probably bought 140 acres we purchased, and we've got maybe like 30, 35 acres, something like that left, I would say, if I just had to throw a dart at it. So it's all gone very well. I mean, it's completely de-risked now. All the debt's paid off. We have cash to build out the rest of the amenities, and we've taken some pretty healthy distributions. So I still have more inventory to sell. So it's in a really good spot. Now we're kind of getting back to, we put together some, it's kind of a balance of, we like all this stuff. We know it's going to good. We need to sell it, make money, de-risk it. But it's also selfishly, we wanted to hold on to some of it. So I think, in our collective partnership groups, either friends and family, we kind of clawed back 6 or 7 riverfront lots in there. And that's where that first outcome came from, was the first build that we did in there. That was amazing. So we're super excited about that. We're looking into kind of getting into build mode now, looking at some building structures to kind of get more involved and get some economics on the build side as well, with knowing that we have line of sight to 10 to 15 builds with our existing stuff we already have in these, plus looking at some of these other remaining lot inventory and deciding, does it make sense to sell it, or does it make sense to build on it because we've got the backstop of the management to cash flow it, or we just can extract more value via home sales plus lot sales. So that's kind of where that sits. I don't know if I just kind of a long answer or story there, but
Well, you hit on everything that I wanted to talk about for the most part, and we could dive into a bunch of the different nuances behind all these things. It was a lot. I mean, is the answer, and it's been, I don't know, 3 years since or 2.5, well, about 2.5 years since we closed, and 3.5 years or 3 years since the genesis of the project of trying to actually purchase the land. And there's been, manageable challenges along the way, but there's also been a bunch of huge successes. Like, for example, I think I'm pretty sure we've set the highest per acre comps on lot sales for the entire market. So have set the highest per square foot for the house type. So in terms of like the number of bedrooms or the house size, we've set the per square foot comps. We've set the highest comps on per acre. And I think it's just a testament to the execution, the vision, and really just, the proof's in the pudding, right? It's like
Yeah,
we can
well, we
talk a
also
good
we
game.
also invested more than anybody else would out there. So we should expect higher comps and higher things because we have amenities out there and we have something that's completely unique. And that again, that was a big bet. There's a couple big bets on the village land purchase. Then it was the amenity bet, and then it was the marketing effort bet. And luckily for us, I think it's worked out really well. But not without challenges. I would say if we had to do it again, I would say lessons learned on that would probably be a little bit more better capitalized on the working capital front, just to manage some of the interest payments, and if things don't go as fast as you want or as quickly, you're not sweating and staying up at night. And then two, realizing the amount of work that goes into that. What we didn't do is we didn't really carve out any although in this case it was mostly our own money anyways, but we didn't really carve out anything for the management and execution of it. So it's someone not in our situation. It's more third party investors. Just don't think it's going to happen, and you're going to pay the bills in the meantime. So that would be a piece of advice that we probably something we would do a little different. It's not one the end of the world, but it was just passing along a few lessons learned.
For sure. I think in any startup that I've been involved in that's capital intensive, being overcapitalized is always a good thing, because whatever you think it's going to be, multiply it by 1.5 times. You probably just, and not necessarily because the costs come in higher, but just because there's things you could do either more efficiently or better, whether that's marketing spend, whether that's spend on additional employees or resources, consultants.
Or you have money to
Um,
put up a spec home that shows development, things like that. So I agree 100%. It better be overcapitalized. You might sacrifice returns on paper, but your realities will be a lot better.
For sure. And you can also, the other interesting thing that I feel like we've learned out here is that there's so much economies across the board, whether it's like the self-managed, when we first started out here, it was buy a place. And then it was, well, if we build a place, we can make even more margin because building's cheaper than buying. And then it's like, well, look at these developers. I think it was like the first time, I can't remember who it was, but one of our either builders or developers like flew in on their PJ to meet with us. And it's like, okay, maybe we're doing the wrong,
Yeah,
maybe we're in the
right.
wrong part of this. If this guy's flying in on his private jet, maybe we're the mark.
Yeah,
Um, and so then you start to say, okay, well, then the developers, they're making all this margin. And then the builders, they're making margin. And then the real estate agents, they're making this giant margin that's risk free. The property managers are making a margin. The service companies are making a margin. And so you start to just try to figure, and now with all those things comes more execution risk and oftentimes more capital risk. But if you can get scale and you can figure out a way to swim upstream and start to say, okay, well, I could probably do my own development, or I could build my own homes, or I could manage my own properties, or we could, sell our own cabins. I mean, we've sold these cabins that we've sold that we've hit these high water marks. Some of them have been with real estate agents. Other times it's just been from I mean, how much I think you spent
two.
like $5 or $2 on
Yeah,
signs.
I spent $2. We've sold two of them. I think at least two. The two biggest sales we've had has come from a sign I put on a tree that cost me $3 at Walmart and saved us, 100 grand in realtor commissions. So
Yeah, you just start to see as you progress in these things that there's a lot of ways to make money, and you got to be smart about it. You got to get efficiencies, and you got to get scale. And if you can do that, and be patient and do the hard work, I think that things will pan out. I also feel like not cutting corners, and even though it was a bigger bet to spend the money on the marketing and do the event sale, or it was a bigger bet to spend the money on the amenities. I mean, those aren't cheap amenities. It's millions of dollars of amenities. I mean, it's a couple million
right,
dollars at least of amenities, so $100,000 gate, $70,000 dock, $80,000 dock, like, nice
yeah,
playground, walking trails, benches, fire pits, swimming pool that's coming up, sports courts.
bridges across the creek.
Yeah,
It's fifty
bridge.
thousand dollars. Yeah,
Right. So, carving out, I mean, and the other big bet on that too is that just that acreage in and of itself, where these amenities are, was probably a couple $1 million worth of acreage if we just sold it. But then now you've landlocked all the interior lots and they don't have access to the river. They don't have access to these amenities. So really, if you factor in the land value of the carve out for the amenities, it's probably like a $4 or $5 million bet, $4 million bet maybe,
Mm-hmm.
because of what you could have sold the acreage for versus what you had to spend, and then you're doing it. But ultimately, I think that's panned out because we've sold a bunch of interior lots, and the people that you talk to that have bought the interior lots, they think it's a great value. They're like, hey, this interior lot, it wasn't like bare bones pricing, but it was cheaper than the riverfront. I still have access to the river. I can still go, enjoy all these amenities. There's going to be a pool and a clubhouse. It's right down the street. I love this. I mean, the location thing, as much of a risk as that was, it panned out to be, people love that. I mean, I hear that all the time now. People are like, I just like it here because I don't want to be in Ho Chi Town, like in the middle of all
Yeah.
the traffic and all that.
So my wife told me the first time we got to stay out there in that house, she's like, "Oh, I just like this so much better. It's more like remote and whatnot." But yeah, just to hit on your point real quick, is as far as the interior lots, not to be like promoting ourselves too much, but I mean that's how I view it. You can go out there and find a basic plain Jane lot out there and pay 70-75 grand for an acre or something. Our stuff is probably closer to 100 an acre for interior, but now you've got river you can put on your advertising. And I think it's kind of, I mean, if you take into account what you're going to spend for a pool, a workout room, pickleball courts, river access, all this stuff, it's a drop in the bucket. It's a hell of a value, honestly. I think that's going to play out for sure. Just seeing all the data that we have coming in on the rental side, the management side, I think it's going to be a huge value for people in there.
Yeah. I think it could be partly undersold too. People always want a deal, and I think this is something I've learned in real estate, not just through what we've done, but even just my personal residence, and just as I've gotten older and looked at a lot of real estate across different segments, single family homes, just whatever it may be. Like, real estate's cheap for a reason, right? Like, if it's that doesn't mean you can't overpay for something that's still not good. But a lot of times when things are priced higher, there's a reason they're priced higher, because they're better and they're going to appreciate more or have a higher value than the stuff that's priced cheap. And I've seen that even with like my first home I bought. It was kind of a budget starter home, and I probably could have paid up a little more to get into a nicer neighborhood. Well, those nicer neighborhoods and nicer homes, they went up in value way more than my starter home did. So it's
That's
like,
exactly what I've been talking about. That's why we're looking to move too. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like just getting in there and it's going to go up more. I mean, just
and
personally,
yeah.
yeah.
And I think that people make the mistake with, specifically in Broken Bow and Ho Chi Town market, is that I've talked to people even where they're like, they thought they got a really good deal because they bought a super cheap cabin. And it's like, it's super cheap because it's not going to perform. Like, it's not a good, if it was a
Right.
really high performing cabin, it wouldn't be super cheap. If
Yeah.
it was a great lot, it wouldn't be super cheap, you know?
It's a 5 or 6 bedroom cabin that's doing 50 grand a year. Our 5 or 6 bedroom cabins that have views and a pool and some other stuff and are marketed are doing 280, 290. So,
Yeah.
it's
Right. Well, I think that if this has been good, we're coming up on an hour. If people want to find us, find the development or find the rentals, what's the best place for them to go? And you probably check those emails, or our VAs check those emails. So if people have
yeah. So
questions, where
they
can they reach you?
contact at AinsleyRE.com, AINSLEYRE.com. We'll definitely go to our kind of reservation support team, but probably for either one. And then they can, if they get an inquiry or something, they'll direct it to us if they need it. The websites for development is www.mountainforkresort.com. And then for all our cabins, it's mountainforkvacations.com. That's our property management site where you can see our existing inventory and see if there's, if you want to come stay with us, we'd love to host anybody.
All right. Sweet. Thanks, Jeff, for making the time coming on.
All right. Talk to you in like 30 minutes.
All right.